is Lewis Robinson. I'm the programming director at the Portland Public Library, and I'm joined by Sarah Skowinski, literature and language librarian at
Hi.
PPL. And this event is part of the PPL's Spotlight Lecture Series. Tonight, we are super psyched to have Phuc Tran and Jaed Coffin here with us to talk about their memoirs. I booked this event like in September of last year and have been looking forward to it ever since. So the day has arrived. All right. Let me introduce these two, and then I will promptly mute myself and let the boxing match start. So Phuc Tran is a classicist and tattooer for over 20 years. He's taught Latin, Greek, German, and Sanskrit at schools in New York and Maine, and was an instructor at Brooklyn College's Summer Latin Institute. In 2010, he served on the committee to revise the National Latin Praxis exam. His 2012 TEDx talk on grammar and identity was featured on NPR's TED Radio Hour and mentioned in Newsweek. As a tattooer, Phuc owns Tsunami Tattoo in Portland. He's been featured in national tattoo publications, and he's been quoted in the Christian Science Monitor and Time magazine. His memoir, Sigh Gone, was released in April on Flatiron Books. And Jaed Coffin is the author of A Chant to Soothe Wild Elephants, a memoir about the summer he spent as a monk in his mother's native Thailand, and Roughhouse Friday, which chronicles the year he won the middleweight title of a barroom boxing show in Alaska. Jaed is a professor at the University of New Hampshire, and he currently lives in his hometown of Brunswick, Maine, with his wife and two daughters. So welcome, Jaed and Phuc, and I'm gonna step aside and I'll rejoin you later.
Thanks, guys, so much for having us, and thanks, Jaed, for. Hey, how are you? Thanks for having us. And so Jaed and I talked, and we've arranged the evening like a boxing match. So there are going to be 5 rounds of dueling passages, and then Jaed and I are going to discuss the passages. So basically, the way it'll go is, and we have slides with the text for you to read along in case you don't want to look at our foreheads. So it'll be Jaed will read, I will read a passage, we'll stop the slideshow, and then we'll talk. And then I have a timer on my phone that will, with a boxing bell that will ding after 5 minutes, and then we'll go on to the next passage. And then hopefully that will encourage you all to ask questions at the end. So Jaed, do you have anything you want to say before we start?
No, I'm just really excited to be here. Not here in my house, but here with you, Phuc. This is pretty cool. Let's do it.
All right. Okay. All right. Let's do it. Okay. So here goes the first passage. So Jaed's up first. Yeah.
And now, talking to my father, the equation of his life appeared more clearly to me than ever. In going to war, he had made his payment, that he had met my mother, brought her back to the United States. This was the exchange of values, that she had given him a son. This was how he had gotten his money's worth. And when he had found the next thing he wished to buy, another woman, another family, another life, he had made a final, irredeemable transaction. It was a good world to buy in, but how the woman pays and pays and pays, first with her country, her culture and origin, then with her family, her life, her heart. Yes, I said, my hand tightening on the receiver. I remember that part. My father took a deep breath, exhaled. Wow, what a story. What a story. Yes, I thought as I hung up the phone. It was quite a story.
During the car ride home, I had an innocent, childish urge to tell my dad everything. I didn't say anything, but the desire to share the most intimate moment of my life so far was evidence that my connection to him, no matter how threadbare, was still part of my fabric. As distant as he and I were, distanced by the violence and absence of common understanding, I recognized my indelible need to connect to him, to have him be my father. And in that need, I also knew he wouldn't understand. I was more afraid of his judgment and reprimand if I shared with him what I had done and how I felt. And in that fear, I was silent, as he started talking to me about school and grades and honor roll. All right, let me start the timer. This is round 1, Jed. Okay, the timer is going. We got 5 minutes. Let's do this.
All right, we're on. Why did we select those passages? What was driving us to do that?
So the idea for this whole evening is that I think our books in particular are really interesting in conversation with each other. And we're thinking about places where they coalesce, and then places where they diverge, and even places where, even though the Venn circles overlap, they're different in interesting ways. And so that passage, I think, right, we talked about like choosing a passage about the relationship between our parents or our fathers in particular. You know, I think in your memoir and my memoir, like our fathers loom large, right? Yeah.
And you know, Phuc, when I read your book, I remember I got to read The Galley. It was last summer. It was a year ago. So that passage was the one that like drilled down the soul of the book for me in a big way, because you'd just been through a very pivotal moment, a kind of a first somewhat coarse exchange of intimacy, and it's something that I think you wanted to share with your dad, and you just couldn't talk about the one thing that you needed to talk about as his son. And so I remember reading that passage, and my book had come out like a month before I got your galley, and I just was like, man, that is the essence of the emotional texture of that passage is exactly what I was trying to articulate or capture in the passage that I read. That like sometimes the thing you want to say the most is the most impossible thing to communicate or even articulate to someone that you love, but also have certain tensions with.
Mm. Yeah, and do you think, does it feel, you know, it's like it's very real for both you and me, and at the same time, like I recognize that, like it's, like at what point does it stop feeling universal and start feeling cliche for you? Like that's something that for me, when I was writing it, it felt really, I was like, oh yeah, here's just me, like here's another boy like complaining about his dad, like, you know, get in line.
Right.
Like how was that, like did that land for you in the same way, like when you were writing about your book?
Not until later. You know, I think it feels so deeply personal as you're creating this thing, because you start at zero. You know, you start with a blank page, and you don't really know who these people are that you're creating, yourself included. And then you start to see it as a piece of art, and it allows you to compare it to other pieces of art that are about similar things. You know, I think my story and your story are so unique, and yet there is nothing more universal than for me, at least in my story, than the father-son experience. You know, yeah, and I guess feeling that universality is in some ways comforting. I don't know, maybe it isn't for you.
No, it is. It really is. I mean, and that's what drew me to like all the great books anyway. So I think what's really interesting is that I'm in such close proximity with my father, like physical close proximity with, I mean, I'm living, you know, and I think for your story, it's so interesting because like there are flashbacks, but your story, the narrative of your book takes place when you couldn't be further apart, like geographically from your father, right? Like do you think, and yet both of our parents loom large, right? So it's sort of like no matter how far you travel, like I think there's an interesting resonance there, this idea that like the geography maybe doesn't matter. And the timeline's a little bit different too. Do you want to tell our, we actually haven't told anybody what our books are about.
We're living in our own little Zoom world, man. Yeah. There's who's out there? Yeah.
What the hell's your book about?
Yeah. Oh, geez. We are just taking right off. Okay. So real quick, my Roughhouse Friday is the story of the first year that I boxed. I boxed for like, I don't know, like 6 years, I guess, in my 20s. And Roughhouse Friday is about the first year that I fought in a barroom boxing show in Juneau, Alaska. So the kind of the groundy story that runs, that I suppose keeps the the reader keeps the clock running is about me training and fighting in this bar. But if that was what the book was about, I don't think it would really be that interesting a book. It's really about that pivotal period in your life where you have to encounter more honestly certain facts of your past. And at age 24, I kind of had no choice but to do that. And so those two stories are finding each other. The violence that I found in the ring and the necessity to look more closely at my personal history and my father's decisions primarily.
Great.
What about you?
The boxing bell just dinged. So round 1 is over. Nice job.
All right.
Let's go back to the corners. So we're moving on to the second passage here.
Well, I'll just say, like, while you're finding it, I'll just say that I think that our books are as different as our jackets tonight. Like tried to match jean jackets, but we couldn't really, So it's like that's whatever that difference is to the people out in Zoom land. That is the difference between our books. So be ready for that.
It's super real.
Yeah.
No, I think they're great. I think they're yeah. It would be really amazing. I think it would be a great read to read them back to back, honestly.
For sure.
Even more so than Ocean.
All right, 12
or something like that.
All right, round 2. Here we go. All right. After my school day was over, I always had a couple of hours to burn before my evening training session. But now, the middle of January, it was too dark to do anything outside, so I spent all my time reading. I read with a newfound patience, a searing intensity, as if under a spell. I read more books that single winter than I had read in the past 4 years of college. Even now, I can recall not only every book I've read, but where I was in my apartment, couch, table, floor, when I read certain passages. My purpose in reading came from some primal place that was neither academic nor for entertainment. I'd often been told that the point of reading was to take you away from your own reality to create a universe into which you could disappear, but I was not reading to escape. Murakami's Norwegian Wood, a heartbreaking work of staggering genius, and You Shall Know Our Velocity by Dave Eggers, For Whom the Bell Tolls, the complete short stories, The Farewell to Arms by Hemingway, Cannery Row and the Long Valley by Steinbeck, The Sound of Waves by Mishima, Whitman's complete poems, Song of Myself and a Noiseless Patient Spider, Jack London's Martin Eden, The Unbearable Lightness of Being by Kundera. I underlined passages that moved me, dog-eared pages that spoke to feelings I had within me but couldn't express, scribbled stars and notes to myself beside sections that felt as if they'd been lifted directly from my mind. I would never feel so deeply connected to books ever again, but at that point in my life, when I felt as though the world I knew offered me no models of how a person like me could exist, I read books as if pressing their pages against the rough form of my body, grafting their meaning onto my own emerging story. All right, you're in.
Okay. As I read, I began to understand that all the great works wrangled with big questions, important questions. Our place in the world, the value of our experience, the fairness and meaning of our suffering, our quest for love and belonging. Universal themes bound me to these great works together, and they bound me to their oaky yellowed pages like Odysseus, lashed to the mast of his ship. I felt a connective and humanizing resonance in books. I wasn't alone in my aloneness. I wasn't alone in my longing for love. I wasn't alone in my fear of being rejected, my fear of never finding my place, my fear of failing. The snarl of my journey was untangled and laid out clearly by books. In the great classics, there were so many moments for me to divest my age, my town, my skin, so many moments to be part of a universal conversation. Homer sharpened my mind's edge. Dickinson gave me winged hope. Thoreau made a whole cabin for me. All right, buddy. Why do we pick that?
How'd you get into that stuff, huh? Books. That's so self-referential, right? Yeah. Let's talk about books while we're talking about our books. Man, that word, Phuc, divest. That's the word that has like the DNA of your whole book in it, I feel like. Or that is the DNA of the genetic code for a lot of the way I think you're understanding books in your book. Yeah. Stories as a simulacrum for who you want to be or who you can't be or think you might be or whatever.
Yeah. And that's different for you, you think?
Divest.
Yeah, you're filling in gaps, right? That's my take on it. I don't know.
I think, yeah. Well, it might have to do with the way that the placeness of our books, right? Because you're at home, and I left home, so we're at these weird like inversions of life periods. Like I'm at the period right after your book ends. And so I'm not trying to divest things. I'm trying to try things on.
Yeah. Yeah.
I hope that doesn't sound condescending. Like I'm like, oh, you'll get there, big guy.
No, not at all. Not at all. Yeah, no, I feel like your book is like the big brother version, right? Yeah, no, it's really like people have asked me like, what would the next book look like? And I'm like, oh, well, like if my book, like had a baby with Ernest Hemingway, it would be your book, right?
Yeah.
Because I think like, no, but I mean, I think like there's like a, like, I don't like, I think your book is still very much like wrapped up in that idea of trying to find out who you are, right? Like that quest for identity.
Right.
What do you tell me about this? Like, what do you think? Why? Like, what is the idea of like the coming of age story? Like, and would you say that your book is a coming of age story or not? Like does it?
I don't know. I
like,
think
is it? Okay.
In your jacket copy, they use a coming of age tale, right, on the inside flap.
Yeah.
I wonder how much of that has to do. Like, yes, you leave us right at the brink of coming of age, or maybe I don't know, but also it's like a narrative structure issue, I think. Because you have to come of something in a story. And if it's not age, then I don't know what it would be, but maybe it's no joke that, I mean, we can't write about middle age in real time, or we could, but I wouldn't be very good at it, I don't think. And I think there has to be something redemptive about our stories. And I would like to hear you talk about that, because I feel like one of the things that I loved about your book is you didn't really give us that. I probably am more of a put a bow on it type of writer than you are. Does that rankle you at all? Does that sound like I'm misidentified? I like to feel like I have all the loose ends kind of in some little woven pattern, and it seems like you're more willing to let the weave sort of just do its own thing.
Yeah, be messy.
Yeah, and so maybe you get more coming of age the more you try to weave.
But I'm also curious about both of your books, where they're really in terms of chronology, they're hyper focused, right? So
yes,
so Chant to Soup Wild Elephants is summer, right? I mean, not there's not other narrative pieces in there, and then
right.
And then Roughhouse Friday is also just a year. I mean, not just a year, but it's a year again with other narrative pieces sort of interwoven. And I'm trying to cover 14 years of my life, basically kindergarten through high school. And people are like, what, you stopped there? And I'm like, dude, I can't write this isn't, I'm not Proust, where I can just just crank out volume after volume of.
Yeah. I would blow your mind if I wrote about myself for 600 pages, easy,
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the passages that we chose though, about books and our relationship with books. And were you being hyperbolic when you said you read more that year than you did in college?
Not at all.
For real?
I think that's a compliment less to the amount I read that year than an insult to how much I didn't, but was supposed to in college.
Because you were assigned a lot more reading, you just didn't do it.
Yeah, well, I also just was too distracted. I was living in this little basement apartment by myself, and it was dark in Alaska, and there's just nothing going on. I didn't have the internet in my apartment. It was just me, and so books are a lot more meaningful.
The bell just went off. Round two ended.
All right,
folks. This is what boxing is really like, people. Just when we're drawing blood, we get a break, go to our corners,
Back to our corners. Sure.
All right, I'm sharing the third passage here.
Oh, right on. Cool. This will be fun to talk about.
Yeah.
Total softball for both of us, I think. All right. On our way downstairs, Victor said, Jade, I was wondering, where are you from? Maine. Just like I told him the first night we met. Where's your blood from? I told Victor the story I'd grown comfortable with. My mother was from Thailand. My father was American. They'd met in the Vietnam War. There always was where the story ended. What about the half-Asian sensation, Todd said. I thought about that. Why not the half-white knight? So let me just say that this is a moment in the book where I have to choose a ring name as a fighter. And so I don't know what the ring name should be, and like any good name, someone else needs to give it to me. Victor was still thinking. Jaed Coffin. He paused. What about the stone? The stone, I said. Jaed the Stone Coffin, Victor said. I repeated the name a few times to myself. The stone. It did not occur to me that Victor had likely associated the stone with Jaed, stone, and coffin. Perhaps in his mind's eye, he'd seen a glowing green tomb where my opponents would all be laid to rest. The stone, I said. Sounds good. Victor and I squared up plans for our departure on Friday morning, then parted ways. But later, as I ran down Halibut Point Road, I imagined a blank, featureless tablet waiting to be engraved with a story. I threw punches into the rain, hissing my new name, the stone, into the mist. Phuc.
What's my name in English? This was more than just a 4-year-old's question about penises, vaginas, and where babies came from. This was a 4-year-old's question about where he came from and why something as simple as his name had more than one answer. Here's a vulgar family secret. I've said my name wrong my entire life because of this very moment. In Vietnamese, my name is phonetically pronounced Phuc. It sounds like a baseball clapping into the lithe, oiled leather of a catcher's glove. Phuc. Also, because Vietnamese is tonal, like its northern neighbor, Chinese, there's a rising tone to it. So your voice upswings like a valley girl if you say it correctly. Phuc. The letter C at the end of my name isn't even pronounced like a C, thanks to archaic orthography and sound changes in the language. It's a P sound. The question precipitated a flowchart of choices for my father. In that moment, he had to make the decision that many immigrants are burdened with when their mother tongue is not compatible with their adoptive homeland's phonetics. This is the original game of broken telephone. What are our choices? What do you do when Vietnamese doesn't sound like English? How do you pronounce Phuc? Well, I'm glad you asked, Mr. Tran. Behind door number 1. Approximate the sounds, but stay true to the pronunciation. Phuc. Behind door number 2. Make slight adjustments that don't sound like the original, but seem to make sense with the spelling. Phuc. Behind door number 3. Pick a new name and bury the old name as a vestige of a country lost and forgotten. Americanize it completely. Peter or Paul. John or George. All right. You want to go?
Yeah, I want to go. So how early in the writing of your book did you realize that was going to be part of one of the threads that you work with? Like, have you been waiting to tell that story your whole life? Like, I just want everyone to know that, like, we've been living a lie. Or do you feel like it was something that organically found its way to the surface as you were telling your story?
So I made that's actually my earliest childhood memory, like, of everything else. And I've told that story, like, I've always just told the story. The story was, like, you know, when you're sitting around in college or with your friends, and you're like, what's the earliest thing you remember? And I always say, like, oh, I was 4, I was in my apartment, and I asked my dad how to say my name, or like what my name was. So like that story has been around, but I think in writing about it, it gave me a chance to really unpack, like, what it meant, right? Like, in my mind, I was like, oh, like, that's just what I remember. It's like my earliest story. But like in writing it and in writing about the context of it, like, it definitely gained momentum and gained a new sort of power to it, you know, as opposed to just being like, oh, it's like the first thing I remember. But so I hadn't been waiting my whole life, but, you know, like, when I started writing, I just made a list of, you know, as I was organizing chapters and stuff, like, that was, I thought, you know, like, why not just start at the very beginning and write the first thing that I could remember in my memory. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And what about you? Like, how did you feel about your boxing name, The Stone?
Well, you know, I think, like, it's great because when someone gives you a name, you know, you can't really refuse it. I guess you can. I mean, that's the whole point of, like, the refusal of so many other names that I was given that I try to create as a motif in the book a little bit. But I thought, yeah, I mean, I think I had a picture in my mind, like I talked about in that passage, that there was almost a gravestone, you know, like something etched into it. And that blankness of what was on the stone is, I think, the blank slate that we all emerge out of our adolescence with into adulthood. You know, like, how are we going to do this? What story are we going to tell about ourselves? And how many different stories will we tell until we feel like we're getting pretty close? And then, you know, as I developed a story, I realized that my father had been very persistent about calling me different names, many of which had a basis, or the primary one had basis in Arthurian stories, like around the word, the name Galahad, which is the name of the prologue. And so, you know, much like deep into the writing of the book, I would say even after probably year 6, I realized that the stone had that symbolic connection to the sword and the stone, and the idea of the Holy Grail, which is the thing that Galahad was able to claim, which is the thing that the kind of lineage, the Anglo lineage that I'd always rejected because it was what my dad gave me, you know?
Did you ever tell me about your first name? I'm so curious. I know it's like pedestrian, but like I'm curious about your first name. Like, yeah. Who made that choice? Like all that stuff.
Yeah, well, it's, you know, it's funny reading your story. It's a tonal. It's on the second tone, so it's like the low. I guess there's 5 tones in the Thai language, so it's Chinese has 4, which I think is where the same lineage as Vietnamese. But my dad wanted to name me Jethro, and my mom kind of heard the first part, Jet, and then she had a very dear friend named Jet, and so they met halfway, or not really. My mom won, obviously, but like, that was her claim, you know, to give me a Thai name. But my whole life, everyone called me Jed, as like Fred, and so of course in the book I transition between Jed and Jade, because that's what everyone calls me, and it's not really any more correct, you know? Yeah.
You might have been Jethro. That's amazing.
No, it's not.
So I you know, and I think I think the idea of choosing as an adult or even a young adult to change your name is so seismic. Like I remember, like even in college, like it's like such a seizure of identity, and also like just such a rejection of some kind of a parental choice. Yeah. I think about this now as a parent. If like either of my kids were like, you know, like I'm going to change my name, like I would feel something, you know, like it would sting a little bit, like, but I chose your name, and yet at the same time, right, like who am I to pick this human being's name, right? Like that's very strange.
Yes. Well, and I think it's interesting in your, you know, early on, I think in the first quarter of your book, you talk about the first name change to Peter, right?
Yeah.
And and I had Jeff. There was a kid named Jeff Power, who had like the most beautiful feathered blonde hair ever, like right out of an 80s movie. And I just wanted to be Jeff Power. I remember hearing that name and being like, wow, that is a name, man. Jeff Power, like Peter Parker, right? Like, or Peter Tran or whatever.
Yeah. No, Peter Tran. Yeah, I was gonna go for Spider-Man Tran, but it just didn't. It was a little, you know, a little too flashy, I think.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Round 3 is over, buddy. Yeah, we're going along. How are you feeling? Do you need a water break or anything?
I'm good. I'm fresh. Yeah. No, we've been training for this moment. We're deep into the.
Okay, round 4. Here we go.
Okay.
You're on.
Oh man, now this is gonna get raw. This is hard. We might emote a little bit here. All right. So just quick preface. This comes from a passage in the book when it's the dead of winter, and to pass the time, I start staying up all night watching movies, and I find myself picking strange movies to watch that I don't really understand the meaning of. All right. Then I got on a kick of movies about Vietnam. Apocalypse Now, Full Metal Jacket, Hamburger Hill, Platoon, The Deer Hunter, movies that once had offered me visions of tragic anti-heroes laughing in the name of absurdity, of heroic young men facing their hearts of darkness in a Southeast Asian hell, now appeared only as the artifacts and relics of some bankrupt civilization. Every quotable joke, every quip, every betrayal, every single death, all of it disgusted me. One night, after I'd stayed up until nearly dawn watching back-to-back both volumes of The Deer Hunter, I turned off my 12-inch television set and stared into the darkness, trying to make sense of the heat in my eyes, the confusion boiling inside my chest. Go ahead, Phuc.
This scene is when my parents and I are grocery shopping. I'm about 10 years old, and we run into a Vietnam vet. "Where are you people from?" The man had yellow tinted aviators and a graying mustache, reminding me of Magnum PI from TV. His belly overhung a large buckle, pressing taut against his plaid shirt. Maybe he was a private eye. Maybe he was working a case or was grocery store security. "Oh, we're from Vietnam." My father smiled widely, nervously. His default was always to smile in awkward or strange situations, but I felt his posture tense up. My father also caught the man's drift, and he moved protectively in between the man and us. "Yeah, thought so. Thought I recognized it. Vietnamese. I haven't heard it since I was in country. Thought to myself, sounds like Vietnamese." Lou started to correct the man's pronunciation of Vietnamese, but I kicked him from behind the cart. Lou caught my drift as well, and he shut up. "In the Marines there, stationed in Da Nang, 68 to 69. He looked at us all as he spoke, eyes slinking from my father's rigid smile to my mother, to us kids. "Oh yes, Da Nang is in the middle of Vietnam. We're from Sigh Gone." My father continued to smile as we stood still, nervous prey whiffing a predatory scent. My eyes scanned the American flag pin and other buttons on his jacket lapel. The gentleman looked at us, but his eyes were distant, their focus going far beyond where we were, right through us. I looked behind myself at the produce section, understanding that he wasn't looking at the broccoli or cabbage. "Beautiful country there, Nam." He said Nam with a southern lilt.
And Phuc, I remember hearing you read that passage early in the writing of your book. We were at the telling room, I think, and maybe we just met.
Yeah.
And that, that it really captured me in a way. And I think it was because it was the 50th anniversary of my father's deployment, and I had been thinking about that, and then you walked in and gave us that character.
Yeah, and so Jed and I thought that it would be interesting, like both of these passages, I think, and both of our memoirs, I think about growing up and living with the legacy of the war, and specifically the Vietnam War, right? And its reverberations, through both of our lives, and so I think it's really, I think it's fascinating in that it seems so obvious for my memoir, right, to sort of have that, to sort of exist in the shadow of that war. And that's something really that I, as a person, struggle with, because it's not of my own choosing, right? And it's sort of like the first thing that, it's like a thing that people think of and they associate, me and my family with, even though it's sort of like, like we're just trying to, get by like everybody else. Like the idea that like people will bring things up about the Vietnam War, and then I don't know it, or I don't know like all the particulars, and then they're kind of like, wait, why don't you know that? And I'm like, I don't like, like, why don't you know what the casualties were for the Tet Offensive in '68? And I was like, I don't like, why am I supposed to know that? So I think that is something that is a source of tension for me. And I don't know. Tell me, like, what is it like for you, Jed? And like, sort of tell me about the shadow, for you.
Well, I think it's interesting because maybe we have like an inverted, like Doppler effect in the way that we both orient ourselves. I think the connection obviously is more direct in your case, and I know that all of us can play the game of walking ourselves back to pivotal historical moments and saying, if not for X, I wouldn't be here. But I know that I didn't really understand. Like I said, I grew up, my mother did not ever talk to me about her, she worked for the Americans as the manager of an officers club, and traveled 500 miles north away from her village to do that. And had she not done that, she never would have met my father. And I think it took me a long time to put those pieces together, like, oh, geez. And, it was about, ironically, or not ironically, coincidentally, it was about the 50-year mark that it suddenly, that bell went off in my head, that like all these movies I'd been watching and imitating and kind of getting a rise out of were a depiction of something that was, one, really pivotal to the course that my father's life would take and my life would take, but also that was just one version of the story, and that I hadn't even considered turning that prism around, and that's pretty uncomfortable.
Does he watch does he watch Platoon and Full Metal Jacket and all that stuff? Or, I mean, like, is that a thing that he, as part of pop culture, right?
Yeah, I don't think it really resonates with his experience, yeah. Did you watch those movies as a kid?
Yeah. I mean, only because that, like everybody else was, Platoon came out when I was in high school. I was like, yeah, let's go see Platoon, and Full Metal Jacket. I think I watched it just because I was a consumer of popular culture,
Right.
But it was always weird because it was always like, oh, and the Vietnamese people are the bad guys again. You know what I mean? I never, and so it really forced me to not, I was like, who do I identify with in this movie, right? Is it nationalism, right? Or is it where as an American, right? I'm identifying with the Americans, and and as a Vietnamese person, right? I'm like, well, I don't know. I'm curious about the Vietnamese characters too. They're
Right.
they can't just be all nameless bad guys.
Yeah. And it's funny, the complexity of emotion, of the range of emotion that we're given about the American experience in Vietnam is so complex. We have Born on the 4th of July, we've got Apocalypse Now, we've got Platoon, we've got movies that can distinguish themselves because of their different take on what it was like for that person, right? And I can't really name a single popular film that gives us one take, never mind a diversity of takes. And it, I don't know. I don't know what, I think it's not a coincidence that we both find ourselves contemplating the historical levers 50 years out,
Sure.
The same way that our generation's still paying for the Vietnam War. I think we're left to try to understand it.
Yeah. All right. Last round 5. Here we go.
All right. So this is a passage that comes from, I'm 6 or 7 fights deep into the season, making a little bit of a name for myself, and the promoter decides that he wants to create some posters to hang around Alaska with my picture on it. So he asked for a photograph. So here's the first time I see the posters hanging in in the hotel where I used to stay. The posters were black with Roughhouse Friday written in the Fight Club movie font. They were plastered over the front door of the travel lodge. Running up and down the sides of the posters were pictures of all the fighters that Haig wanted to feature for the upcoming Southeast Showdown. It was still a month away, but a lot of fighters who couldn't pull it together to fight during the regular Roughhouse Friday season would sometimes emerge for a weekend of big money boxing. There was a photo of Rue in the upper right corner, shirtless, jacked, wrapped hands under his chin. He looked like an old-time fighter from Hell's Kitchen. The GOAT was on there mostly for visibility, even though it was unlikely he'd be flying back to Juneau for another fight. My photograph was in the upper left corner of the poster, hands up, chin down. I was trying to look mean, but my expression was disappointing. I looked unconvincing and unimpressive, more like a teacher dressed up as a boxer than an actual fighter. I had a baby face, round and beardless, and my hair had grown longer. It wasn't my usual shaved head. It was a church boy haircut. Pretty cool, Victor said, admiring the posters. Oops, go ahead.
All right. No. Sorry. Sorry about that, Jed.
Don't worry about it. I was so taken by my own work, I had to pause for effect.
All right.
I got it. Hold on.
There we go. Sorry.
Cool. Pretty cool, Victor said, Oops, I can't see it.
Pretty cool, Victor said, admiring the posters. He ripped off the travel lodge door, handed it to me, and then I followed him upstairs to our room. All right.
Cool.
That was...
Sounds better when you read it.
All right. This is all right. I went to my classes. I aced Mr. O'Hara's quiz and I handed in a draft of a paper for Mrs. Ferguson. It felt easy. It felt like when I liked comic books. It felt authentic. My leather jacket with all the studs and punk pins and painted band names was gone. My brand new boots that I had bought with Christmas money and my band t-shirts, gone. My Walkman, my cassettes, my records, all gone. I had lost my protective shell of a leather jacket. No more punk pretenses. That was past tense. I was at school to learn, read books, and figure some shit out. Was this the real me? Stripped of the ability to look like a punk? What defined me as one? Not my jacket, not my clothes. My friends? My enemies? No. What I did determined who I was, not what I looked like or what I liked. My actions and reactions. Did I emerge from the shell? I felt naked and free. Was I now pupa or chrysalis? I felt like myself, and that was what punk was. The freedom to be who I was unapologetically, even if I hadn't chosen it.
Nice.
All right. So when Jed and I were getting ready, Jed made a funny joke about how he was going to accuse me of being a fake punk. And I think there's like this thread for both of us in the books about being, in both of our books about authenticity, right? And being who you are and what that means. And I think for us culturally, like, I think we wrangle with the idea that people can choose who they want to be. And that if it's a choice, as opposed to like some kind of a natural extension, it's an inauthentic representation of who you are. Is that, am I expressing that in a way that makes sense to you?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
It's like if you want to be a hippie, right, or if you choose to be a hippie, that's different. Or if you put on the trappings of a hippie and you declare that like you're now a hippie, that's not as authentic as I don't know what the opposite of that is, but right. I think culturally, at least let me say this, in the 80s when I was growing up in high school, like it was just like a weird thing to, like the jocks just became jocks because of they played sports, you know what I mean? And then like the stoners were just, ended up being stoners because like they did drugs or whatever. But I don't know, like, what do you think? Like do you feel like there's like the authenticity piece is something that you wrangle with in your book as well?
Yeah, I mean, I always feel like I was faking everything in some ways, and I suppose we all feel like that, but I also had this sense of getting caught. There was the faking, there was the lack of authenticity, and that's, I think, pretty universal. But more to the point, I think I was worried I was going to get busted, and I don't really know. And once I got busted, someone would find out who I really was, but I didn't really know who I really was. So I was like, well, what am I going to get in trouble for? And that kind of circular sense of like self-suspicion can make you a little weird in your head,
But even after like you had your first fight, like you didn't feel like that answered some questions for you, at least about like authenticity, like winning, like the first real win. No spoilers for the audiences here. After your first real win, not the fake win.
Yeah.
Like that didn't cement things for you or solidify things for you?
No, I feel like I'm still a coward, in this weird way. And I don't know, do you ever, like you have carried forward some of the person that you were during the period of the book that you write about, if not like just style wise, like something came with you from that period of your life.
For sure. Like the seeds of it are planted, but college is like a total mess too, right? Like, so it's like college, you're just like, ooh, blank slate. Like I get to be who I want to be. Did you feel that way about college? That like, it was like, I don't know anybody now.
Oh, gosh, I'm so, we can all cringe at our younger selves and feel ashamed and whatever, but I just don't want to look at the pictures, partly because it was like the death of grunge. So like nothing could go right. Early 2000s, and then partly just Yeah, it's like extended puberty, you know, where you're just everywhere. What did you say, like identity seizure? I
Yeah.
think, which is such I really like that term, because I think in many ways that's what our books, like, what does that seizure look like, you know, in some ways.
Yeah. And yeah. And I think and when people don't get called out for that, I think it's like a luxury, right? Like, or it's an extension of the privilege of who they are, like whatever privilege that is, where they are in society, like
Yeah.
that, like that some people get to try things on and don't get called out for it. And then other people, it's like, they get sort of penned in to like, you're this or you're that. And you're kind of like, you're stuck in amber, right? Okay, so we promised Lewis that we would give him 10 minutes. Lewis, we cheated you by 5 minutes, so I'm sorry.
You promised me 20. We have some good questions. So, but this has been excellent. Thank you guys for going deep. So the first one is actually the rest of them are addressed to both of you, but this first one is for Phuc specifically. And it asks, after reading the often brutal relationship with his father, how does he take his experience as a child and apply it to being a father and parent? Does he at any point think, man, I am acting like my father?
Ooh, yeah. Like, yes, all the time. And I mean, to be like, I've taken, any chance I get, I'm sort of shouting out the benefits of health and and counseling. I think when we found out that we were going to have our first child, I like had this moment. I sat down. I thought, what kind of a dad am I going to be? And I thought, well, I'm not going to be my dad. I'm not going to be my father. And I thought, is that really like a plan for parenting? Like, doing the opposite is not like a parenting plan. And so like, I really like went to counseling, and I felt like I had things to unpack, and I felt like if I couldn't understand and reconcile and sort of come to terms with my relationship with my dad as a son, I felt like that was going to affect who I was as a father. So like I did some like pretty intense counseling and sort of came to terms with a lot of stuff, and have as good of a relationship as I can with my dad, again, thanks to counseling. And but yes, there's definitely moments where I'm just like, oh, that's like totally like a thing that my dad would do. And I think it's like, it's lessened. So I hope maybe my girls will be like, okay, like these are the things that we've inherited from Phuc and, or dad, and, that'll dissipate with time, but for sure. Yeah. That's an intense question. Holy cow.
Yeah. Right out the gate.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you earlier about how at 718 you said that essentially your book is the daddy of Jed's book, but we don't have to go there.
Chronology.
Remember that?
Okay. Big brother.
Big brother. So Desi asks, I love how both of your memoirs showed how literature helped you make sense of your place in the world. I wondered how it makes you feel to imagine other young readers finding your work. What do you hope they take away?
Jed, you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, I'll try to be brief. Like it just really, I don't mean this is going to sound like I'm being falsely naive or something, but whenever I have someone write to me about the impact that something I've written has affected them or shown them something they needed to see, it surprises me. Partly because I think at some point in the writing process, I forget that people are going to read what I write. And partly because maybe I've just lost touch with the part of myself that I miss that part of my brain that like is hearing another writer's voice more strongly than my own, It's my own fault. I just wrote too many pages in between or something.
I think I'm so deeply touched. I think I'm super humbled, I guess. Like to answer, I think Desi's question was, how do I feel about it? I think I'm incredibly humbled. I think Um, and I would always be like, oh, well, you really should just go read all the people that I stole my stuff from, like go read Thoreau and Emerson and Whitman and, all those guys. But I mean, obviously, I think, yeah, I think it's incredible. I mean, I think I feel that way about being a teacher too sometimes, that like, I think like I could never be as good of a teacher as my teachers were. And then I'm always incredibly touched and really grateful when former students come to me and they're just like, you were that person for me. And I was like, I was like, and sometimes you don't know, right? You're just like, I don't know. Like I was just doing my best. I don't, so yeah. Yeah.
Thanks for that. So Bruce King is asking, I think both of you, and I think he's asking about your, kind of contemporary selves, but is there an explicit tension and even guilt that exists between identifying as American while struggling to resolve those identities we come from? No softballs here. No.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I think guilt is the word, I never stop feeling like I got a free pass whenever I connect with the people back home, you just look in the margins of the photographs that they send us and it's a different life.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say so too. And yeah, are we incredibly privileged? For sure. Like, is that necessarily like a do not like, bypass, go straight to go, collect $400, like golden ticket to like happiness? I don't know. Like, I you know what I mean? Like, I think if the idea is like, are people better or less, better people, or are they happier or more content? Like, I'm not sure if we're in a better position than anybody else to, feel fulfilled with our lives. What do you think, Jed?
Well, I just right now I'm thinking of in the short story Sonny's Blues by James Baldwin, where the narrator returns to Harlem with his brother, and he compares the feeling of leaving a place behind to a fox that's gotten its foot stuck in a trap and had to gnaw the foot free. But he says that it's always that he calls it the feeling of that. He says it's when the missing member aches, and I just that's that word ache, of the thing that's not there, and yet the pain of it feeling like it still is. I think that's what Bruce is tapping into, and it's big.
It's there's a longer answer to that, Bruce. I'd love to talk to you later.
Yeah.
All right, next.
Thanks, Bruce.
Amy's question is, who have you found your primary audiences to be for these memoirs?
Phuc, go ahead. You're fresh in it. You're right in it right now, man.
I think I would say there's a good chunk of readers who are like, I'm hearing, like, so I guess I don't know who's reading it. I only know who I'm hearing from, right? So like, that's not scientific. But who am I hearing from? I'm hearing from a lot of like young Viet readers, like, so that's really exciting. And there's like kind of an interesting like uptick of like Vietnamese and Vietnamese American writers right now. So I think so I think that community is like, oh, like there we are, like, in terms of representation. And we're telling, and I think the stories are being told are so different, right? Like, my book is not at all like Ocean Vuong's book, and our books are not at all like Viet Thanh Nguyen's books. So I think like that is also really interesting. And I'm hearing from, I don't, everybody, like I'm hearing from, 60, 70-year-old Vietnam vets who have read it and been really interested in it. And I'm hearing from, young millennials and, former students. So it kind of runs the gamut. Yeah. But what about you, Jed? Do you think you have an audience?
I don't know. I'm not sure. That there's always that tension between what the book how it seems to be thought about and categorized, and the matrix of like story that you tried to articulate. And I feel like those two things haven't really matched up yet, So not to criticize whatever readership of mine is out there, but I am surprised of how much I tried to say that doesn't seem to be heard. That's kind of a angsty thing to say, but anyway, yeah.
No, I think it's valid.
Yeah.
Lou, you got another one for us?
I have one. I know you ran out the clock. I know, but I have one more for you from myself. And I'm just curious to hear you guys talk a little bit about the like to what extent the presence of the living members of your family had on the writing of your books. Like as you were writing, to what extent did your parents in particular have on how you wrote it, how you unearthed it, how you revised it? I'm just curious to hear you both talk a little bit about that.
Go ahead, Phuc.
None, zero. Like I feel like the chance to write a book, like I feel like it was like getting struck by lightning. And so I thought, if this is the only chance that I have, I wanted to be as, sort of raw and honest as possible. And I don't, and I have, my relationship with my parents is limited, so like, I think, I wasn't too, and I don't want to sound cavalier, but I wasn't worried about damaging relationships with them. And I felt like any truth that I had to say, like the person whose relationship I care about the most is my brother, and he and I have had so many conversations that I didn't feel like I was going to say anything that was going to fracture our relationship. So I didn't really think about my family much at all, actually, in writing the book. And also I was really careful in only recounting stories that I was there for in the first person, with the exception of I think like one story. Like I think I felt like otherwise, if I wasn't there, it wasn't my story to tell. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well,
you really are punk rock. You really are. There it is. There's the evidence.
Yeah.
What you were looking for, Jed, right?
Or
the
jerk.
There it is.
Yes, Scott Simon says jerk.
yeah. Cool.
No, Jed.
What about you, Jed?
You're up. You're up.
Oh, I was hoping I wouldn't be. I just I was very concerned, and it had less to do with the art than it did with, I think, just the culture of our family, which was to have what felt like a close relationship, but to never talk about the most obvious things that needed to be addressed, and so it was like 39 years of compacted soil, like holding these things down, and it just isn't pretty when they come to the surface, and I had never been through that, and the book, for a lot of different reasons, demanded that those things come to the surface, and just as a kind of appendix to that, my mom, I think, felt very pleased that I finally spoke up on a part of our past that she didn't ever have that she had too much dignity to talk about. And I thought she would be the most offended. And my father and he asked if there's anything that he could do about when the book came out. And I said, I don't want to talk about it. I just don't want to talk to anyone about it. I just want to, it's a painting on the wall and I want it to just hang there, and you get to walk by it and feel what you feel and then walk on,
Wow. You guys,
Right.
do you want to just drop the mic there, or Bruce King does have a follow-up? Do we want to?
Oh man.
And then we can really,
It's your
so,
best buddy.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna just ask this one follow-up question from Bruce King. So he said that you did an amazing job of addressing the question that he asked, but he is curious to know how Maine specifically plays into that, into kind of like, addressing that tension in your life, like just living here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love Maine. I think I think because like everybody who, unless you're like a real Mainer and there's like such an argument around who gets to be a real Mainer, like everybody kind of treats you like you're not from here anyway. You know, like like if you're from New Hampshire and you move here, you get treated like you're not. You might as well be from, you know, Hawaii. Um, so like I feel like a lot of people are in my boat in getting treated like they don't belong here. So that's great. And also and also I think I just love like there's like a kind of Yankee economy to relationships that I really appreciate. You know, if I can paint all sort of Mainers with a broad brush, you know, obviously Portland is a different kind of like urbane bubble, but I love Maine, like I really do. I've lived here longer than I've lived anywhere else, you know, and if anybody let me call myself a Mainer, I certainly would. Jed, are you a Mainer? Do you feel like a Mainer?
Well, you know, it's funny. Like, I suppose the answer is no, because I was born in Vermont, and then I came here when I was 2 or 3. But my parents had, my mother's first job in America was at Boone's restaurant in down on the waterfront in Portland, and you know, her first apartment was on Neal Street. My dad's father had lived here for many years, and there's kind of like some roots here. And in some ways, my parents, you know, bailed just long enough to have me in Vermont. You know, I will say that like, I don't know, writing a story that, I don't know if this is true, but I just feel like a lot of the people who I've known my whole life are maybe feel like was trying to settle a score with my dad that that I didn't need to settle or something. And I don't know who those people are. I don't know, and I'm kind of okay with them feeling that way. Not because with any kind of, I'm not, you know, because Phuc, I'm not punk, you know. So I'm totally just kidding. But I'm just like, it's cool, you know. But when you write a book within your own community that scrutinizes that past, people are going to see it differently. And the only thing that really makes me mad is I'm like, hey, you know, I'm a writer. Like, I work really hard. Give me my shot to do this. And it's okay if it doesn't agree with you, because I'm cool with you not agreeing, your version not agreeing with mine. Like, let's just let that rest, you know. But it's a fraught. I wish that I was living in somewhere else, you know, for the last year, just because I like to avoid difficult conversations whenever possible.
Yeah. Can I just give a shout out to Jed, who really went out of his way to costume change, you know, like, I didn't ask him to do this, but he felt that, you know, denim and glasses was the mandated uniform for tonight's reading.
For sure. Thank you, Phuc. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And thank you guys so much. This was really an excellent event. I really appreciate the time. And to everyone who attended, thank you for showing up. And Longfellow in Print, they have copies of both of these books. Give them a call or send them an email. They'd love to hear from you during this time. And see you at the next event. Thanks everybody.
Awesome. Take care, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks, Lou. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Jed.